Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the fourth in our series of Farm to Early Care webinars. We've really had fun with this series and we're excited. This is the last one we have scheduled, so we're excited to have you here with us. My name is Erin McKee. I am the program director with the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy's Farm to Institution program. So our goal with these webinars, if you've been joining us as we went along, is trying to take the training and technical assistance work that we do with our early care partners and distill that down into basic webinars to give the background to other people who might be interested in starting up or expanding a farm to early care program in your own setting. Basically, our program, we try to both incorporate purchasing local foods to serve in meals, as well as educational activities in the classroom and family engagement activities. And those are the three main components of our model. So we've had webinars focusing on all of those things. And funding for this project is provided in part by the Center for Prevention from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and also from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So they've been supporting us in our farm to early care work. Today's webinar is the fourth in the series, and we're going to be focusing on how those of you in early care settings can actually purchase food from your local farmers to serve to your kids. We'll be talking about doing that at lots of different scales. So whether you're at a child care provider company that has many different centers across a wide geographic area, or if you're a family care provider with just a smaller number of kids and you're the one who's kind of doing it all, purchasing all the food and preparing it yourself, we're going to be talking about models of local purchasing that can fit all of those situations and everything in between. We know that partners are very excited about getting a farm to early care partnership going, but they don't always know where to start about finding local farmers. And so that's kind of what we'll be addressing today. We'll also share a little bit of background on our process of how we work with our partners before trying to find the local growers in their area, and then we'll talk about the different models. And we'll hear from our special guest speakers today. So we have Emily Paul. She's the Director of Programs from the Good Acre Food Hub joining us. She can talk about the Food Hub model of purchasing from local farmers. And then we also have Grace Brogan. She's the Program and Communications Manager for Renewing the Countryside. And she's going to talk about ways to purchase directly from farmers and methods of local purchasing that can work for smaller scale and family care providers today. We'll also recommend some resources to help you get started. So that is kind of what we'll be covering. And just a little housekeeping background before we get started. If you want to ask questions during the webinar, you'll see if you kind of move your mouse over the window, there should be a little area where you can ask questions. So just click on that. You can ask questions anytime during the webinar, and we'll get to them all at the end when we have a Q&A. You can ask questions of any of our panelists, including myself as well, and we'll get to as many questions as time allows. I also want to let you know that we'll have a short evaluation form at the end of the webinar. We would love your feedback. This is the first time we've done a series like this, so we would love to hear your thoughts. And if you also need proof of attendance for any reason, you can contact us afterwards and we'll give you a certificate of completion of the webinar. Also, we're recording this webinar. If you love it so much you want to watch it again, or if you want to share it with some of your friends, we'll be sending out a link both to the recording of this webinar and also to resources that we mentioned during the webinar afterwards to all attendees. So don't worry about furiously taking notes about everything we say, because we will share that. So let's get started here. So the first thing that we like to do when we work with our partners, our role at IATP is to help them get started with early childhood or farm to early care programs. We help them make the connection with local farmers and how to purchase for them to serve those foods in their meals. And that's one of the main components of our program model of farm to early care. Additionally, as I said, we do have the education activities in the classroom and family engagement as well. So we help them with those things. But one of our main roles is this technical support in trying to build the supply chain for their individual program between local farmers that they want to get food from and their meals. So one of the first steps in our planning process, before you even make the connection with farmers, we like to take time to think with them about what their values are and what their goals are with these programs. Why do they want to do farm to early care? We want to make sure that when we're designing the model for them, we're adapting our program to work with their situation. It's really meeting those underlying goals and values that are important to them. And knowing what those priorities are from the very beginning really helps define what kind of local purchasing you want to do. So for example, it might seem kind of basic, but it's really important to define what local means for you. Maybe you want to support farms that are within a certain mile radius of your early care setting because it's important to you to make sure that your dollars are circulating in your local community. Or maybe you want to focus on farmers from your entire state. Maybe you're okay with farmers who are in your entire region. You know, it's up to you to make sure that what your definition is meets your goals. There is no rule about what local means. I think that can be a little bit confusing. People think that they're enrolling in a farm to early care program and that there is some kind of rule or external authority that's saying, okay, if you're purchasing local, this is what you should be doing. You get to decide for your own community, for your own early care settings, goals, what that means to you. So just think about that and think about what's important to you, because that will determine what farmers you want to work with. There might be other values also that you're trying to support with your purchases. So you might want to choose farmers who are using sustainable growing practices in order to protect the environment in your local area. Maybe you even want to focus on purchasing some organically certified items. Maybe it's important to you to make sure that the farms that you're working with are treating their employees and farm workers ethically. That's something that a lot of our partners will raise as well. Or maybe you're interested in humanely raised animals if you're getting products like meats or eggs, dairy, things like that. Another thing that we have definitely heard from our partners is wanting to work with some sort of disadvantaged farmers, such as immigrant farmers, minority farmers, people of color, women, beginning farmers, small-scale farmers. Maybe it's important to you to make sure that you're choosing farmers for whom this will be a new market that will really have an impact on their bottom line and will really be helping keep farmers on the land who otherwise wouldn't be able to make it. So that's something to consider. What type of farmers are you trying to support with these programs? And maybe you're also interested in getting some culturally relevant products for your community that can't be purchased from the regular streams of food that you have. So maybe you want to get some items that will let you do some culturally relevant recipes. So just think about all of those things. And this is really a conversation that you want to have within your program and within anyone that you kind of are going to make a leadership team with to plan your farm to early care program together. It's just important to really ground yourself on these values and goals, and then use those as your guiding light as you're choosing how the program will progress and what farmers you work with. So the next thing you want to do is also get a handle on what your current food supply chain looks like. So that can be just basic information like how many kids are you serving, how many meals and snacks do you serve a day. Those numbers can be different, obviously, if you have some kids who are doing half days and things like that. You want to get a total picture of all of the meals that you're serving and what different opportunities there are to serve local food. Maybe you'll start out by saying, okay, I'm going to start doing one snack a week that's local, and then we'll focus right in on that snack on Wednesdays or something like that. Or you might want to look at your menu and how many meals you serve and look for opportunities where you're serving products that aren't local right now, but you can easily substitute the same product but grown locally. So let's say you serve a lot of zucchini and you can just make a substitution of local products. So you want to kind of get an assessment of how many meals and then look at your current menuing practices and look for ways that you might make substitutions in that could prioritize local purchasing and local products. Think also about how you purchase your food right now. So maybe you're a bigger childcare provider company and you're purchasing through a broadline distributor. Maybe you purchase the groceries as you need them yourself directly from a grocery store. And then think about, how often are you getting deliveries? How often are you making those trips to get the food? Those methods of local purchasing, you can try to fit in local purchasing in the way that you're already getting food, and that often is a really easy way to start. If you want to make this program sustainable for your situation, it can't be something that's really burdensome, so you don't want to set up a really inconvenient separate purchasing track for your local products that isn't easy for you. You want to try to integrate it into your regular way of doing things so that it really can become just part of your normal way of purchasing food. Then think about too your cooking process. So are you cooking in-house? Are you using an external catering company? Maybe you have different locations that are doing different things. Maybe some of them have better equipped kitchens than others and things like that. Those are all important things to consider. And those different situations might have different capabilities. Some of the sites might have more capability of scratch cooking, so that would let you purchase a greater variety of products, while others might have they might need products that are already coming in ready to serve. So those are important things to think about as well. And then think about your menu and who is actually making the decisions about what is on the menu and what recipes are used. If possible, you want that person to be included in your planning process and to be enthusiastically on board. So hopefully, maybe some of you who are attending are that person. If not, it would be great to make sure to engage them right away in the process and then have them be part of the planning instead of just coming to them later and trying to get them to do something that you've planned. They really are important key players in the program. And then also think about your staff engagement. So if you are in a situation where maybe you have a nutrition coordinator and that person is deciding the menu, but then you have kitchen staff who are the ones that are actually cooking the food, it's really important to get them on board as well. And just so you know, we have another webinar that is addressing training of nutrition staff and also training of education staff separately as well. You want all the staff to be on board and think about, are they trained in scratch cooking and food prep? And make sure that you're not deciding on menu items or products that are going to be too difficult for them right off the bat. You want to kind of start at the level where they are so that they don't resent the program and feel like this is just a ton more work and it's too hard for them. Experience, training, and level of engagement can really influence what recipes you want to put on your menu. And it's often really nice to start with recipes that you're already using, as I said, and just substitute local ingredients where you already have those items on your menu. So those are just some things to think about. There's also another thing I wanted to mention is that we do have a webinar talking about how to work with the CACFP program and how to make sure that you're thinking about on-farm food safety when you're making your decisions about what farmers to choose. We're not going to get into all of that today. This is really more about making the connection with farmers, but just know that that resource is there as well. So we're going to get into the details here about the actual processes of purchasing. We're going to start pretty big, so some of you might think, oh, this doesn't apply to me at all, but don't worry, because Grace is going to get your back later on. But I'm going to start talking about broadline distribution companies and the kind of big scale situations that some of you might find yourselves in. Just to give you an example of what this might look like, in 2011, IATP partnered together with our first farm to early care partner. They were an amazing partner to work with. They really helped us develop our model. They are called New Horizon Academy, and they are a nationally recognized child care provider. They have 67 centers throughout Minnesota. Most of them are in the metro area in the Twin Cities, but they also have some centers in Rochester and St. Cloud, and they serve over 8,500 kids. About 20% of their kids are receiving child care assistance, and many of them are also private pay. So they have a really diverse community that they're serving. They also have a really diverse population, including children from Caucasian, African American, Latino, Somali, Hmong backgrounds, many different diverse communities. So they're a big company. They have an exclusive purchase agreement with the distribution company. So they need to purchase all of their food, including their locally grown foods, through this distributor. The distributor has produce that's cut by a separate fresh cut processing company that's near the Twin Cities. So all the foods are delivered on the distributor's trucks directly to each center, and then they're cooked on site at the center. So they're cooked, they control the cooking process themselves. They have a centralized administrative team that makes decisions about the menus and things like that, and then they send that out to all 67 of their centers. The system that they had in place and the scale that they're operating at made it difficult for them to purchase directly from individual farmers. However, it did enable them to access local foods in a way that was very integrated into their regular existing food distribution system. And they were able to have the program's fresh fruits and vegetables delivered pre-cut to the locations. So the way that we worked with them, we actually worked very closely with that distributor. So we met with them, we explained this is the program that we're doing, this is our goal with the program, we really want to purchase from local farmers. And that distributor was able to give us a list of what the local products are that they have and who the farmers are that they work with. So this is a little map of where the farmers are in Minnesota. These are really great farms. I met with all of them. They are pretty bigger scale fruit and vegetable growers in Minnesota. They're still, family run. They're awesome. They're keeping money in the community. They're creating jobs in the community. So it was great to be supporting them. And this was our starting place. Just that conversation with the distributor was our starting place for setting up this system. We also had to talk with them about the communication process. So how would they let us know what local products were available week to week, and then what farms they were coming from? And in this case, you had to kind of work backwards. So they would not be able to tell us ahead of time, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have snap peas from Edfields and Sons. We would have to, they would know on the day of, like, okay, we got these snap peas from a couple different farms that are local. We're going to make sure that the ones that we're sending to New Horizon Academy are the local ones. Those are from Edfields and Sons. And we would have to find out exactly which farm they came from after the fact. So, in that way, it's a little bit different than knowing exactly. You can't publicize ahead of time, next week they're going to have from this farm. You need to kind of be a little bit flexible, but you need to make sure that you have transparency with your distributor about where products are coming from. Whether it's before the fact or after the fact might not be up to you. But the good thing about working through this distributor was that it was a very streamlined process. It was a limited administrative burden on the staff from the early care provider. They coordinated all of the supply. They filled in, we gave them the product list of what we wanted and when, and then they would look at what was available and then fill in and make sure to prioritize the local product. They were able to meet the demand of this large scale child care provider company with multiple center locations. The drawback was really that lack of control about which farmers would be purchased from, and kind of you had to give it up to the company. And the other drawback that I saw was that the farmers were actually not aware of where their food was going. We had to go meet with them and let them know. So it wasn't necessarily making the immediate impact on their bottom line. So you might be thinking that you're not seeing the close connection with farmers that you would expect in a farm to early care program in this example. But even if you don't have that idyllic situation of the farmer rolling up with the box of apples directly to you, it still is making a big impact because it's creating systems change. It's putting pressure on these big companies who work with lots of institutions and letting them know that there is a demand for local product and transparency from their customers. So that's really important. I like to tell people that they really have power that they may not recognize When you are going out for a bid to contract with a new company, you can let them know that this local purchasing is important to you. So there's also a resource from the USDA that shows about procuring local foods for child nutrition programs. It outlines on how to apply local specifications to your broadline distributor procurement. And I would recommend doing that and letting your company know. They might have local products available that you are not aware of. So do check in with that. And then I did want to highlight one other example of a supply chain where you were working with big companies. So here we had a situation where we were working with a Head Start program in St. Paul, Minnesota. They were purchasing from the Hmong American Farmers Association, which is an immigrant farmer kind of cooperatively run food hub. And they really wanted to purchase from them because they provided the opportunity to do field trips and educational opportunities, and then they lived in the community. This Head Start program has a large Hmong community themselves, and actually some of the farmers have kids that are in that program, so it was such an awesome partnership to work with them. They had a situation where they had a contract with a catering company that was providing their food. And similar to the situation with New Horizon Academy, we met with that catering company and explained, you know, these are our goals, this is what the Head Start wants to do. Can you purchase locally? How can we set this up? And in their case, they needed the food to be washed and cut before they could receive it. They were used to getting chopped produce that they could just cook with right away. They didn't have the capacity to do all of that processing themselves. And so we were able to figure out, working with a processor in between the farmer and the caterer, who could actually do that process. Now the situation here, it was really important to make sure to coordinate and have lots of transparent communication between all of these different players, and have a system in place that would let them communicate, you know, these are the products that are coming, this is when the delivery is going to be made, and all of that. And it's also important to know that, you know, there was some lack of transparency sometimes where Head Start had a contract with the catering company was buying from the processor, and the processor was buying from the farmers. So the food was changing hands at a lot of places, and sometimes it was difficult to see exactly like who had control to make the decision of, you know, this product is too expensive this week, or you know, this product isn't available, so we're gonna have to make a substitution. You just have to have really clear communication between all those different players about decision making and things like that. So in both of these cases that we've shared here with the broadline distributor, the catering company, we went to them, we explained the program, and they were excited about it. They got enthusiastic and they were willing to work with us. They were able to make it a priority. They wanted to keep us as customers happy, and so it was a successful partnership. But you might be thinking, oh my gosh, what if they say no? What if they say that that's not possible? So we're going to share with you a little bit of other information about alternative ways to purchase. So even if you do have a contract, we're going to talk about some other ways that you can purchase local product, and then we'll get into the smaller scale purchasing as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily. She's going to talk about food hubs today.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. And thanks everyone for participating today. I might have spoken to some of you a couple weeks back on our first of these 4 webinars with regard to culinary training. So today I'm going to pick back up on the Good Acre Food Hub specifically that services the greater Twin Cities area, but speak to food hubs overall throughout the state. I know we have a couple folks on the webinar that are across the border. So there are a couple food hubs in Wisconsin, obviously in Iowa. So I'm happy to provide that information as well, but have listed Minnesota-based hubs for our conversation. So what is a food hub? If you think about a hub on a wheel, it is a center point. It is where farmers can come together, bring their produce, and then redistribute the produce out into the community. So by definition, a food hub, as defined by the USDA, is a business or organization that actively manages the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source identified. And source identified means pre-qualified or considered vetted or safe food products, primarily from local and regional producers, to strengthen their ability to satisfy wholesale, retail, and institutional demand. So wholesale, obviously in bulk, larger quantities, that power of aggregation. Retail would be maybe a direct to consumer or to a retailer establishment. And then obviously the institutions that we're talking about today that are serving food to population. So the Good Acre Food Hub here, located here in Falcon Heights, within our Food Hub space, we have a CSA, which is about a 500-chair direct-to-consumer CSA. We have a wholesale program that is geared toward institutions such as yours. We work with K-12 school districts, colleges, universities, senior care facilities, child care facilities, any large food service entity that has a desire to serve higher quality, locally grown and sourced food. We want to be that conduit. So we also have a shared commercial kitchen that we provide culinary trainings within, and also offer cooking classes to the public, not just institutional food service. Some of you on the phone might have, or on the webinar, might have come into our facility for one of those trainings. And then finally, being a broker to community organizations between local food and their local needs. So next slide. So why would you work with a food hub? As Erin mentioned kind of at the end of her conversation about broadliners, some of you listening today might be saying, gosh, I can't manage, I can't be a farm to institution coordinator. I have too many things, too many little people running around, but I'd love to work with someone who could be that coordinator between farm and my food service needs. So that's kind of what a food hub is acting to do. It wants to be in place of a human being, coordinator, an entity that can help make those decisions for you and help menu plan, and then liaise with farmers to figure out when you need product, how much you need, and when is that product growing in the state of Minnesota. So as I mentioned, we are that conduit, we are that middle person. We provide that back-end due diligence on farmer vetting, and I believe it was webinar 2 where you talked about identifying food safety standards, and then ensuring that farmers meet those food safety standards, especially knowing that your population is more vulnerable to high quality, demands higher quality food. So we are that vetting mechanism and identifying farmers. We at the Good Acre here work with about 60 different small farmers. I think it's important to note that the network of farmers that we work with are new, immigrant, minority, or in somehow disadvantaged farmers. So they are not the larger scale farmers that maybe a broadliner, as Erin mentioned, would be working with. Our farmers are growing on the 2 to 20 acre approximate range. So smaller quantities, but through the power of aggregation, we can fulfill larger orders. Smaller farm size just means that you're going to have to work with more small farmers to fulfill some of the larger institutional orders. But flip side is that if you are a small buyer, for example, you don't need 10 cases of something, you need 1 or 2 cases. Working with a food hub can kind of speed that process along and ensure that those smaller quantities can get to you versus having to order minimums that a larger broadliner might demand. So in terms of price structure, obviously there are some price adjustments between buying local sustainably grown product and buying more conventionally nationally grown product. But really at the end of the day or at the end of the week, we find with many institutional buyers that the overall cost adjustment is very minimal. So buying local is, as many of you know, listening, is not going to cost you too much more, if anything, but you are having obviously the resources and the quality food available to you. So the ability in working again with a food hub is that you don't have to be necessarily knowing and up to speed on what's growing locally, when it grows, how it grows. Whereas because a food hub is able to kind of pre-qualify and then explain to you what product is available when. So we will meet with a buyer, for example, and sit down with a buyer pre-season or midway through the season and say, this is what is available to you at this juncture. This is a case size. This is a price per unit. We can talk about the quantities that you might need depending on how many children you're feeding and providing food for. Last thing logistically with a food hub is that if you're coordinating with, and this is less of an issue, obviously, if you're working with a broadliner, we are more similar to a broadliner in that we are one delivery, one invoice, versus having to coordinate with 15 different farmers, this product from this farmer, these 2 products from this farmer, these 3 products, this 1 product. We're able to kind of, again, aggregate in scale and quantity, but also in the amount of farmers we're working with and the diversity of product, and deliver that food to you in one fell swoop. Thanks. In terms of, like I mentioned a couple times, pre-qualification and vetting farmers, this is to ensure that growing standards and growing practice are in line with their certification. So if they're an organically certified farm, we make sure that indeed that all of those farm practices are being followed. If they're a transitional farm, which means that they're a farm that is not yet certified organic because maybe they haven't been growing on the same plot of land for a certain amount of time, but they are still growing in good agricultural practice or in sustainable practice, we'll note that. We have a grower support specialist. We also call him a farm scout, who goes around and meets with our farmers and ensures that all of the growing practices are on the up and up, and true to what is certified or not. And then also we can plan for crop failures, or obviously there's Mother Nature is at play here, as is the weather in Minnesota, right? So, but ensuring that product will be available as noted and as scheduled between us as the food hub and you as the end consumer and buyer. Next slide. So where are food hubs in Minnesota? I mentioned kind of out of the gate that I'd be focusing on reviewing the 10 food hubs that were, as of February 2016, operating and functioning within the state of Minnesota. But there's also, as I mentioned, some kind of on the eastern part, eastern corridor of Wisconsin, and then obviously the northern corridor of Iowa that many of you on the phone might be liaising with. And I'm happy to provide you with those information and those connections if you are out of state to us. But in terms of Twin Cities area and then outstate, in the state of Minnesota, there are 10 food hubs that are actively servicing the community, liaising with growers, whether it be a certain diaspora or a certain population. As Aaron mentioned, the HAFA, which is the Hmong American Farmers Association, or Shared Ground, which is a cooperative of Latino growers. There's different food hubs that are servicing and working with different networks of growers. But for the most part, everyone listed on this list, these 10 food hubs, are liaising with small to medium-sized farms. Next slide. So this is an example right here of what we would provide a prospective buyer pre-season, or like I said, midway. If we were connected to you mid-season, this would be an overview of what is available and grows locally in the state of Minnesota and within our area specifically. Obviously, the growing season's a little bit longer in the southern part of the state, but everything on this produce list that you see in front of you is what we would have available during the growing season in larger wholesale quantities. There's specialty crops, like if you wanted a husk cherry or a ground cherry to expose kids to, we would be able to provide you with that, but that isn't something that we're storing, berries, et cetera, that we are storing in large quantities and in inventory and then moving in wholesale. So, but all, depending on quantities and needs, we would be able to get you some of those specialty products as well. But out of the gate, this is what we would offer during the growing season. You'll note that there's a case size, but we can work with buyers if that doesn't fit your needs necessarily. We can, make sure that the quantities and the size that is coming to you is exactly what you would need it to utilize and would actually utilize. In terms of price range, you'll see that it isn't a fixed cost and fixed point, because these prices are offered to you before the crops are coming out of the ground. So as Aaron mentioned earlier, you have to be a little bit flexible, knowing that you're at the whim of, the weather, as well as crop failures, et cetera. But for the most part, that's the range that products would be available to you. Obviously the unit, price per pound or by count, and then finally the months available. So I think that is probably the biggest, one of the biggest services we can offer the buyer, is to talk them through what's available and when. So, you would expect we would be able to schedule out for you institutional, or any food, I would be able to schedule out for you institutional quantities available in certain weeks of the year. So if you wanted to feature 4 produce items in 1 month, 1 item a week, or 5 days a week, or omit 1 day of the week, you would be able to do that very easily. We would be able to schedule that with you, knowing you might have a day or two on either end of the growing season that we'd have to accommodate. But that projection forward allows you to both menu plan, do capacity building for your staff around those produce items, and then also obviously be able to serve them in a timely manner. Next slide. After you would, if you identify wanting to purchase locally via a food hub, we would put you on a weekly availability list. So this email, this is just a snapshot of what the email would look like going out twice a week, depending on when you're if you have weekend, operations, or if you're just Monday through Friday, depending on when that food would arrive to you, we would be able to ensure that the quantity is right, the timing is right. You would then just place your order like you would through your broadliner or through any of your other sources, and then the product would be delivered to you. Finally, this is something that I spoke about on the first, at our first webinar, but the idea of having some hand-in-hand culinary training along with procurement. As Erin mentioned, you have kind of two options out of the gate. You can either supplant current sales or current items that you're buying through a broadliner or through alternative sources with locally grown or sustainably grown product via a food hub or via smaller buyers, which Grace will talk about or smaller sources, which Grace will talk about in a minute. But the ability to have some staff capacity building around what do you do with this item. You know, if you hold up a parsnip, it isn't just a white carrot. It tastes different. It is prepared. You know, you can prepare it differently. You don't have to peel it, for example, et cetera. So there's different ways that we are able to then handhold and help you introduce new items if you're not just going to supplant items from your current food service. So that's something that a food hub offers. Not all food hubs have culinary training capacities, but several of them in the state do have that ability. So make sure that you make note of that. Next slide. So I think we're done. Please feel free to email me. Again, it's Emily Paul, and it's emily@thegoodacre.org with any questions you would have. Happy to make connections out of state or answer any questions in the Twin Cities area or anywhere else. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Emily. So now we're going to pass it over to Grace. She's going to share more information about how to purchase more directly from farmers. So Grace, we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Emily, and thank you for everyone who's joining us today. As has been mentioned earlier, there's this fantastic spectrum of ways that you can purchase locally, and what I'll be talking about are some of those more direct or smaller scale methods of purchasing locally, but they really can complement a variety of early care settings. So when you're thinking about purchasing locally for meals and snacks, these are some ways you might look at doing that. But keep in mind as well that when you're bringing in local food, it is also an opportunity to touch on some of the educational pieces that other webinars have touched on. You can be using that local food as well in cooking projects with your children, working on kitchen skills and other educational activities. So there are different ways that local food might be working its way into the children's lives in addition to meals and snacks. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as Erin mentioned at the top of the hour, choosing where you purchase your food is changing systems. It's an opportunity to connect with your local community and your local economy, your local farmers, in a different way perhaps than you have done before. So it's something that might be new to you and something that you can explore doing in ways that suit you. It can be step by step. It can be flexible. There is no one particular way that you must purchase locally for farm to early care. It's really not a one-size-fits-all. It's finding what works for you. So where can you purchase food from local farmers directly or at smaller scales? Farmers markets are one great opportunity. At Renewing the Countryside, we have professional development training for providers across the state of Minnesota. And oftentimes in that training, we visit farmers markets with providers to kind of talk about how that process works. Farmers markets in your area might be happening on weekdays, on weekends, in the evenings, during daytime hours. So there's a lot of flexibility to find what might meet your needs. And you could, if it's during daytime hours and you're able to bring your children off-site, incorporate them into the purchasing process. Help them explore what farmers markets look like, meet farmers, see these transactions and these community connections. Farmers markets allow you to see what's in season, what you might be interested to purchase at the scale that you're interested in. Maybe you're starting small. This is a great way to kind of get to know farmers in your area. There are a number of resources to find out where farmers markets are in your area, and we'll talk about those at the end and share them after the webinar. But farmers markets are one great way to connect directly with farmers in your area. Maybe just start developing those relationships and perhaps they offered other types of sales that you might move toward after that. And one of those types of sales are called CSAs, or Community Supported Agriculture Shares. If you're not familiar with these, I'll just give a quick summary. CSAs are kind of like magazine subscriptions in that you pay upfront at the beginning of the season, often in the spring, for a box, or we'll call it a box, but it can come in a variety of forms each week through the growing season. So traditionally that might be 16 or 18 weeks, let's say June through September or October. You'll receive a box of what is in season from that farmer. And this is a great way to learn what's in season, to engage your children in seeing the joy and surprise about what's in there. It's also a great way, because CSAs often have a newsletter or educational component. Sometimes they include recipes and cooking instructions, that you can start to learn about some new foods to you. So CSA shares allow this flexibility, this learning. CSA shares can be picked up at a community site nearby. Oftentimes, if there are a large number of folks, farmers are willing to develop a new pickup drop-off site in an area. We worked with geographically concentrated home care providers in 2015, and because there were enough of them, between 5 and 10 in one neighborhood, the farmer who was already delivering to that general area established one of their homes as a drop-off site, so it made it really convenient. And it was also an opportunity to engage families. The provider might be using that CSA share and those vegetables and fruits and other items in meals and snacks for the children, but it's a great way to maybe send some produce home, or let families know that you are or could be a drop-off site or an intermediary, and connecting them with a nearby CSA drop-off site. So CSA shares are a great way to get to know farmers in the area, get to know what seasonal produce is available to you. And there is a lot of flexibility. Some farmers aren't only doing what's called a full share, which is often a quantity for a family of 4 or so for this full 16 to 18 week season. Some offer half shares, and maybe that's a good place for you to start while you're just exploring seasonal local produce. Or maybe it comes every other week, or maybe they have a spring share, a summer share, and a fall share. So there are a lot of ways to explore how these shares and these connections with the local farmers might work for you. Local grocery stores and food co-ops are another great place to find local food. It's less direct with a farmer, but oftentimes there is some information, some educational information, some marketing information associated with that produce at the co-op or the grocery store, so you can learn about local farmers in that way. And this is a good way to maybe integrate local purchasing into shopping that you're already doing. So look for the local section, or ask someone in the produce department if they have a local section, so you can start to get to know what's seasonal, what's available, what farms are in your area, and begin exploring local purchasing in that way. A few other opportunities for local purchasing are roadside stands, you pick or farm stores right on farms, and child care gardens, where it's less about, in this case, purchasing and connecting with a farmer, but it's a great way to kind of have an entry point or a gateway to be learning what's seasonal, to be working with your children on seeing how food grows and beginning to incorporate it into meals and snacks and activities. In all of these opportunities, you're connecting your children with who is growing local food, and that makes them oftentimes more likely to be willing to try it. So that engagement with local farmers is a great benefit to engaging the children in trying new things that they might otherwise not be up for. So it develops these close community ties. It develops these relationships that could lead to farm visits. You could bring your children out to the farm and see how food grows, what farming looks like, or bring farmers into your site. Maybe in the winter time, that's a great time for farmers to come visit, to really engage children in what this process and looks like, and start to develop that understanding of the food system, and really engage them in their own healthy eating behaviors and understanding where their food comes from. It also diversifies the income streams for farmers in a really tangible way. Earlier, Aaron mentioned, at some of these larger scales, when farmers are selling into distributors, they may not be able to see on their bottom line or to know that they are feeding children in their community, that they're making this fantastic connection with future citizens, potentially families, future customers. So this is a great way to really build those community ties, and for farmers to be able to have that economic impact right away. As I mentioned with CSA shares, but all of these is a tangible way to engage families. Maybe you all go out to a farm visit in the fall, or for harvest in August, if guardians are available to do that. So family engagement when you're in this more direct or small scale purchasing arrangement is another benefit. And these more direct connections might be more flexible and responsive to specific needs as well. Perhaps you develop a relationship through a CSA share or farmers market, and you end up deciding that there are specific seasonal items that you want in larger quantities, or you want to engage in some group purchasing to get even larger quantities with some other sites in your area. Once you've developed that relationship, you can explore these kinds of options and do some group purchasing, some small wholesale orders. Maybe you definitely want carrots and potatoes at these times throughout the year. So that flexible, responsive, connected relationship is a great thing that develops out of these more direct connections. And again, these many of these might work at smaller sites. Home care providers, these might suit really well, but even larger settings, this is a great way to start to learn about early care, to start farm to early care, to start to explore what seasonal food is, what local farmers are in your area. Why don't we go to the next slide? Thank you. Great. These are some photos from some of the trainings and technical assistance opportunities that we've had with home care providers. This is in a local co-op, and the activity on the right is another way to be crossing this local food purchasing and farm to early care curriculum activities. This child care provider, each week the kids would open the CSA share box, see what's in there, and then they'd work on some sort of science, math, literacy, art project associated with that. So this is just another great example of how this local food purchasing and the different styles and methods of doing that can integrate with other farm to early care practices that you're doing. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here is another example from some of our trainings of childcare providers through this Center for Professional Development training that we offer throughout the state of Minnesota at farmers markets, at community gardens, exploring what local assets and opportunities to connect with farmers and gardens there are in their communities. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. I'm just checking my notes here. I know there were a few things that Erin said that I want to kind of go back and connect to before I hop into gardening, and then I know we want to leave some time for question and answer. So I'll kind of move through this pretty quickly. All of these methods that I've talked about at these smaller or more direct scales, to Erin's point at the beginning of the hour, should be in line with your values and goals. Keep those things in mind. What does local mean to you? What are your priorities as far as farming practices? And who's farming and what type of produce they're growing for you. So these can all be applied to these methods as well. Starting small, both with farmers markets and co-ops who are sourcing food locally. These are great ways to start to see, you know, maybe you already have zucchini on your menu and this is something that you can substitute locally, or what you want to focus on weekly or monthly. These are great ways to just be able to do that substitution, whereas something like a share, a CSA share, allows you to learn about new things, see what's in season, and kind of base your menu and activities off of that. Again, these are ways that you can integrate what you're already doing and farm to childcare together. We don't want it to be burdensome. We want it to be something that is just small twists on what you're already doing so that you will continue to do it, so that it's more sustainable for your operations. So when some concerns about time in preparing food come up, consider preparing the food with the children as a learning activity, for example. So integrating, making sure it's not burdensome, looking for opportunities to make these types of activities part of your curriculum. Great. So I'll touch on gardening really quick and then we can move on. So gardening may not be developing that relationship with a local farmer, but it is developing that relationship with how food grows, with easy access to that food, both for children to have a tactile engagement with it, and it's right in the backyard. You can incorporate it into meals and snacks and activities really well. So it makes fresh local food readily accessible. It enhances all of these learning areas that I mentioned. You know, it can be integrated into science, math, literacy projects. It's really hands-on. It's great experiential learning. It is a great way to connect that gardening experience with what the children are learning about the farmers that you might be purchasing your larger quantities for meals and snacks from. So they can say, oh yes, I understand. I saw our tomatoes grow. It's a great way for them to be able to connect what they're seeing and feeling and sensing on a daily basis with maybe what is incorporated in field trips or visits from farmers or through books they're reading or other activities that they're doing. And the produce in the garden can be used in meals and snacks and educational activities. So it can be complementary to other local food purchasing, or it can be a great way to start exploring it while you're considering your other options. So gardening is a wonderful way to learn about seasonality, to engage your children in learning about growing food, and is a great complement and part of farm to early care and perhaps in how you're sourcing your food for meals and snacks. There are a wealth of resources about how to find farmers markets, NCSA shares. We can talk about and share these later, as well as using garden produce and in meals and snacks and considering food safety things. And I'll wrap it up there, and we'll definitely share these after so we have time for question and answer. I'm sorry, I might have gone a little bit long. Thank you.
I think we all went a little bit long, Grace. There's so much to cover. Thank you so much for that great information. And we do have a couple questions that are coming in. So if anyone has a question, you can send it in either through the Q&A function or the chat function on the screen here. But we had a question about food safety and procurement in farm to early care programs. For example, like are there requirements around sourcing from GAP certified farms or things like that, or can they just source from anywhere? I did want to say that this is a big question, so we actually did an entire webinar that is specifically about this type of issue, the on-farm food safety assessment, and also about regulations around procurement for the Child and Adult Care Food Program, the CACFP program. So do check out our other webinar because we had guest speakers who were specifically talking about this issue. But I don't know if, Emily, would you have any thoughts, or Grace, about food safety and procurement?
I think I would just say that, it depends, usually it's the broadliners, honestly, that would require GAP certification or a higher level of certification. So if you're a farmer and you're selling your produce to a Cisco who sells it to a Sodexo who sells it to a child care center affiliated with a hospital, for example, they might mandate GAP certification or some level of food safety certification. As I said, working with the Food Hub, for example, we're doing the pre-qualifying and we're ensuring that good growing practice, whether it's through some sort of a certification like GAP, that those are being maintained, that practice is being maintained on farm, and then obviously in our facility as kind of, the broker to you as the end buyer. So, there are a lot of steps there, and there are a lot of systems in place depending on who you're working with that is doing a lot of that back-end due diligence. So you as a child care facility leader need not necessarily have your hands in that process other than to do the due diligence to ensure that something is being done at that broker level, aggregator level, Food Hub, broadliner, et cetera.
Yep. But basically, it is up to you to decide whether you require those kind of certifications and things. There is no external rule that is telling you if you're buying from local farms, they have to be certified GAP or anything like that.
Right.
So if you do want to get into the details of, how do you tell if a farm is safe, that would be where you'd want to go to our other webinar, and we have Annalisa Hultberg sharing really good information, and she actually has a guide that is a really good resource for those of you to think about what to consider when you're thinking about on-farm food safety and procurement. Another related question is about regulations around procurement. For example, is it the child care provider's responsibility to be checking temperatures on delivery and things like that about local produce, and what kind of record keeping requirements there are? I think that would also fall under that same webinar that we did, because we had Molly Butala. She's from the Minnesota Department of Education, and she is in charge of, she works with the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And so she talked about record keeping and how to make sure that you're complying with the rules around that food program. As far as what regulations there are, there's also a USDA resource that talks about local procurement for child nutrition programs, and that talks about what kinds of record keeping you should be doing and things like that. I think that the main, for all of those questions around regulations and procurement, you would be well served by checking out our third webinar. And when we send the follow-up email to all attendees, we will include the links to the previous webinars that kind of work together with this webinar, because we couldn't fit everything that we wanted to share with you all in one. So do know that we have that information available in those other webinars as well. And I'm seeing that we're coming up against the end of our time here, so we will have to leave it there. But yes, do watch for the follow-up email. We'll have the link to the recording of this webinar, as well as the link to the links to our previous webinars. We'll also have links to different resources. So Grace had a really good list of resources there. I also wanted to share the Michigan State University's guide. This is really helpful. It's called the Local Food Procurement Toolbox. It has really good information about local procurement as well. We'll have a link to that. And then we would love your feedback again in our evaluation survey, so please take the time to fill that out. We really would appreciate it. And if you do need that proof of attendance certificate, you can email Katie. Otherwise, just thanks so much for participating today. Thank you to both Emily and Grace for being our guest speakers and sharing your wealth of knowledge. It was great to have you here. And yes, please get in touch with any of us if you have additional questions that we couldn't get to live on the webinar. But we really are happy to have done this webinar series, and thank you so much for attending. Have a good day, everybody. Hey, bye.